Hello, welcome once again to the GPP Chen Music Podcast. I'm Big Italy 42. He is Josh Shepardson at BChad50. And we've got 10 games on tap tonight. We've got some elite pitching. We've got some solid middle tier pitching. So it's going to be a really fun GPP night. As it seems to be the case every time he pitches. Clayton Kershaw, a huge favorite against a struggling offense. But also very, very expensive. A little bit more affordable on FanDuel, despite being still $13,000 because he's not a huge amount more than your number two option, price-wise at least, Jacob deGrom. But on DraftKings, you got almost a $3,000 difference, $2,800 difference. He's 14-2. So for that reason there, I tend to think that Jacob deGrom is going to be much higher owned on DraftKings, which makes Kershaw an even better play, especially with the banged-up Bryce Harper. Maybe he's in the lineup. Even if he is, you expect probably not 100%. So Clayton Kershaw, we could see one of those vintage performances, especially like we have many times after he comes off of a disappointing start. But either way, despite being healthy, I'm not concerned about that Washington team. All he did last time he faced them on July 18th was 8 innings of 3-hit ball with, 14 strikeouts. So
is that all?
Yeah, not a bad performance considering, I can't remember if all these guys were back by that point or not. But either way, he's more than capable of putting up a 50 spot on DraftKings or a 24-26 on FanDuel tonight.
Yeah, and as you noted, I mean, the price discrepancy between he and deGrom is definitely going to drive Kershaw's ownership down, that's the recipe for getting a game changer in GPPs, is getting that low-owned 25-point pitching performance. And you hit on one of your punts to make up that price discrepancy, and there are some pretty decent punts tonight. We'll highlight some cheap hitters. Then all of a sudden, you've got a huge edge on the vast majority of gamers who are going to flock to deGrom, which, again, this is no knock on deGrom. deGrom's my favorite cash games play tonight. He also makes for a strong GPP play because the Rockies are bad on the road. They're strikeout prone, but he's also going to be very high owned. So if you can get an extra 5 points out of Kershaw in a vintage Kershaw performance, or vintage as of the 4 starts prior to his last start, so not exactly like we're looking to dial the clock back all that far to get a big performance from Kershaw. Yeah, exactly. Kershaw, my favorite GPP play just because of that price gap in between he and deGrom. But some other names that I'm looking at, I like Jake Odorizzi tonight. The strikeout upside is not huge against a Braves team that does not strike out a lot, but the Braves are scuffling lately without Freddie Freeman in the lineup. They're not very good against righties on the year on the whole. And Odorizzi is a big betting favorite at home. So you expect him to get the win. The strikeouts might not be there in bunches, but he should still tally a handful. And you expect him to pile up innings while limiting base runners, which the limiting base runners is obviously very important on DraftKings. If he's not giving up hits and walks, you're not getting those negative points for allowing base runners, and the piling up innings is obviously valuable on both sides. So I like Odorizzi quite a bit. I also like I like the call that you had before the podcast. So I want you to expand upon this mystery man that's burned gamers on a handful of occasions, and for that reason probably going to be under-owned tonight.
Yeah, the guy I'm looking at as my dark horse is none other than CC Sabathia. He's $6,300 on DraftKings. He is $7,300 on FanDuel. And you look at when CC Sabathia has had success, it's been against lefty-dominant lineups or teams that struggle against left-handed pitching. We saw Boston his last start. Obviously, that's a rivalry game, too. I feel like, I don't know his numbers throughout his career, but I know Sabathia has pitched well against the Red Sox anyway. But before that, his last good start was against Seattle, lefty-dominant lineup. Before that, had a solid start against Miami. Most of their best hitters are all lefties. So CC Sabathia facing this Indians team that has a ton of lefties in it. They struggle against left-handed pitching, and you really aren't worried about many of these guys. So the thing with CC Sabathia is not only is he obviously terrible against righties, 21 homers allowed, 387 WOBA, but he's incredible against left-handed batters. 222 WOBA allowed. They're batting 187 off him this season, and that's 110 batters. So it's not a huge sample size, but it's a decent enough sample size to tell you don't want to target left-handed batters against CC Sabathia. So if we see 5-6 guys in that lineup today, he could be the guy that pays off in a big way. And it's like you said, if you've been burned by him before, seeing that name in itself, and it makes me cringe a little bit too, just seeing it. But he certainly has some upside at that small price tag, especially on DraftKings.
Yeah, and it should be noted that one of their lefty mashers, Ryan Rayburn, bereavement leave right now, so that's a big right-handed platoon bat that's not going to be in that lineup against Sabathia, and that certainly helps quite a bit. Um, the only other names that I will toss out there, and they're more about having a high floor, which we usually look for the higher ceiling in GPPs. But on DK, you're going to have some cheapish secondary options to go with Kershaw if you are going to go that route. Edinson Volquez, big favorite against the Scuffling Tigers, and R.A. Dickey, a home favorite, another big favorite against the Scuffling A's. 7,800 for Dickey, 76 for Volquez. It's very difficult, obviously, to roster Kershaw with anybody really much pricier than that. So I'll throw those two in the mix with Sabathia. Those are probably your three best pairings with pairing options with Kershaw tonight in GPPs. And on FanDuel, I'm not looking at Dickey or Volquez. They're too pricey. They don't offer enough strikeout upside, and there are some better options around them. But that's pretty much what I'm looking at pitcher tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I'll throw out one guy that's purely just to be contrarian, and it's not that I like him in this matchup at all. But Aaron Brooks, if you just want a guy that's going to be about 1% owned, maybe you hope he, gives up a couple solo shots, doesn't allow a whole lot of base runners, because you're looking at his numbers on the season. Obviously, he's only pitched 18 and 2/3 innings, but his hard contact rate's just 18.2% in that small sample size. So it's giving up 48% of fly balls in that time. Like I said, it's purely a contrarian play. But you're unlikely to find any pitcher with lower ownership than him today. So if he gets you, 10 points on FanDuel, maybe 15 on DraftKings at a cheap cost, not a bad way to go if you're playing a ton of lineups.
Nope.
All right. Moving on here to catcher. You and I both agree. I'm sure we're not the only ones in the world agreeing that Kyle Schwarber is going to be your top option. He's the most expensive option on both sites, but it's a lefty against Matt Garza, who struggles against lefties. 367 WOBA this season. And, he's on the tail end of his career. I know he had a good start last time out, but I'm not buying it. I expect the Cubs left-handers to get to him quite a bit tonight.
Yeah, and catcher, always a very popular punting position. So the top, we've seen it with Buster Posey historically. Yep. The top price catcher ends up under-owned because, punt catcher, punt shortstop is a very popular strategy. So Schwarber's price is going to deter some people from using him, even though he is clearly the top play. Another guy that I like at the position is a guy that will probably be under-owned because he's not at home. Brian McCann gets Danny Salazar. Salazar should be fairly popular in GPPs tonight. Carrasco shut down the Yankees last night. And again, the Yankees are on the road, which means that they don't have that short porch. But Progressive Field, pretty good for inflating home runs for left-handed batters as well. Not Yankee Stadium good, but McCann can put a charge into the ball, and Salazar has been known to give up some home runs on his fly ball. So McCann makes for an interesting GPP swerve off of the top play Schwarber. And again, he is pricey. He's the second most expensive catcher on FanDuel, third most expensive catcher on DraftKings. So you can expect that his ownership is going to be depressed as a result of that. But there are some cheap names that we both like. Why don't you rattle a few of those off?
Yeah, on the opposite side of that game, if you're not playing the dark horse CC Sabathia, Yan Gomes, we know, kills lefties. One of the few righties in that lineup that you expect could do some damage. Of course, John Jaso leading off in a nice spot again. But the guy I'm looking at, now that we got a pitching change from a lefty to a righty, is Stephen Vogt, especially on FanDuel, $2,300. R.A. Dickey, we know, knuckleballer. When it's working, it's great. When it's not working, though, it exits the stadium a lot quicker than it reaches the plate. So Stephen Vogt, a guy who's been struggling a lot, did get a homer a couple days ago, kind of getting himself off the schneid, but near minimum salary for a guy with his type of power. Sign me up for that in GPPs.
And a guy who gets a huge park factor shift going from O.Co to playing at Rogers Center. You always have to like guys like that. Couple other guys that come to mind for me, Chris Iannetta against John Danks. Another guy getting a nice park factor shift going from his home ballpark to U.S. Cellular Bandbox, facing Danks. Danks is terrible against righties. Iannetta hits down order, which is usually a pretty good means of depressing his ownership. But he can put a charge into the ball, and he has hit lefties very well throughout his career. And there's another guy that I see at $2,900 on DraftKings that you like a little bit. Might fly under the radar, makes for one of those lefty bats that we talked about getting to Garza with. And he hasn't been healthy all that long. So why don't you go ahead and reveal this mystery man?
I got Miguel Montero, and he's men's salary on FanDuel as well. He's a guy that's got some power. Not a guy that's going to hit for average, but you're not playing a DFS guy like this for an average. But I love these lefty bats. He's going to go low, and for that reason that you mentioned alone, that he's recently back off the DL, only played 3 games. And, I mean, at this cheap price, like, he's got some upside. And, if Garza struggles, if Montero bats maybe right around 5th in this lineup, not only are you going to see him come up with RBI opportunities, but he does have power. So he could be one of your better punt options on the night if Garza struggles.
Yep, I agree.
All right, let's move on here to first base, where there's a lot of options at the top. We'll go ahead and get the other lefty Chicago Cubs bat out of the way. Anthony Rizzo, you got to like him. Albert Pujols is going to be popular tonight, I would imagine. He did get a price bump after that weak performance that all the Angels had last night against Carlos Rodon. Hopefully that suppresses his ownership. I don't know how much of a difference it'll make. I know the recency bias plays in every once in a while, probably more so in cash games, but I do like him quite a bit. And then my other guy, the guy that I always love, that always seems flying under the radar, and it is a lefty-lefty matchup, so people will be off him though. And I don't know if he'll be back in the lineup. Didn't play yesterday, has back stiffness apparently, but Lucas Duda, I go about this every time he's at home. He's got batting almost 100 points higher at home, has higher ISO and WOBA against lefties, and Jorge De La Rosa giving up a lot of hard contact, over 33%, a lot of home runs. So if Lucas Duda's in that lineup, he'll be my dong of the day call.
Nice. I've gone to the well back-to-back days, and I'll make it 3 in a row. Hopefully he delivers tonight. Jose Abreu gets another left-handed pitcher that does not keep the ball on the ground at U.S. Cellular Field. He'd been on a recent tear. He had a couple hits a couple days ago, so it's not like he's been terrible. Did go 0 for 2 yesterday, but scored a run and drew a walk, so continuing to kind of keep things moving, keep momentum going forward. And he gets Heaney at home, so I like Abreu. He'll be my dong of the day call. I like Prince Fielder at Minnesota against Mike Pelfrey. Pelfrey's been basically a gas can of late. His early season mirage has disappeared. He's back to being the Mike Pelfrey that we know, and the DFS gamers love to pick on, that is. The other name at first base that I'm looking at, and I know you are in complete agreement, you mentioned the chalk at first base being Pujols likely, which means that his teammate can't be slotted in at first base. CJ Cron at $2,600 on FanDuel and checks in at $2,900 on DraftKings. I mean, right-handed batters against John Danks at U.S. Cellular Field. What else could you want?
Yeah, especially guys with the kind of power, the double dong upside that Cron has. I mean, he's going to be a really under-owned guy. And another guy similarly priced, and he may or may not be in the line depending on what's going on with Edwin Encarnacion tonight, but Justin Smoak at $2,800. Always a cheap source of power at the Rogers Center. And then I would be remiss if I didn't mention Adam Lind against Jason Hamill. Jason Hamill, a good pitcher overall, hasn't pitched well recently. So Adam Lind, he got to Dan Herron last night. Got to be happy about that. But either way, I love him anytime he faces a righty in a good ballpark.
I like how you stuck the Dan Herron dig in there. I mean, nobody can fault you for that.
There's always a Dan Herron dig to come around. Always. Second base options. You got to like Brian Dozier's price tag on FanDuel. He's probably going to be really highly owned in GPPs and cash games, I would imagine, at his $3,200 price tag. But Nick Martinez, if you don't know by now, you might want to look it up. Nick Martinez is pretty terrible against lefties. Pretty terrible against righties, too. 381 WOBA allowed this season. He's walked 22 batters with 36 strikeouts. So, I mean, he's given up base runners in every way you possibly can. And I even saw a stat. I don't have it in front of me, but I believe he's hit more batters than anybody in Major League Baseball. Yeah, I don't know if it's the most, but he's hit 10 batters this season. 10. And we're talking 10 righties only.
Yeah, don't be fooled by his ERA. His ERA estimators really tell the story. Martinez is not a very good pitcher, and this is a righty-righty matchup that I do like for Dozier. Usually you want to use him against lefties, and at $4,500 on DraftKings, he might be slightly under-owned. I'm with you. I do think he'll be very popular at $32 on FanDuel. Getting to another guy that's priced, I think, could hurt his ownership is Rougned Odor. $3,800 on FanDuel. Hit down order yesterday with Shin-Soo Choo hitting second for the Rangers. From a GPP perspective, I'm rooting for Odor to hit down order again, because if he's hitting 7th, 8th for the Rangers, his ownership is going to be hurt because he has a price tag that is befitting a hot hitter at the top of the order. And if he's not at the top of the order, he's going to get checked off of a lot of GPP roster lists for gamers. So from a cash games perspective, that would be a bummer. But this is a GPP Chin Music podcast, so I'm rooting for him to hit down order, rooting for some low ownership because Odor's been tearing the cover off the ball since he got back from AAA, and has that juicy matchup against Mike Palfrey tonight.
Yeah, I like that. Another guy I think will go low owned in tournaments because it is a fairly tough matchup against Michael Wacha is switch hitter Neil Walker. We know he's been hitting much better from the left side of the plate than the right side. And, I mean, over his past couple games, he had some big games. Had a homer, a triple, a couple two-hit games. And we see a lot of times with these pitchers, just because it's a tough matchup, people just automatically write off the entire offense. But in GPP, that is not the way you want to go. You want to give him a chance and find the one hitter that's going to have the big night against that guy, even if he does have a great performance. So I like him, especially because he's a middling price tag. He's not particularly cheap. But the other cheap guy for me is Wilmer Flores, and I know you've got him on your list as well.
Yeah, Flores has, since the crying incident, has seemed to heat up quite a bit. He gets the platoon advantage facing Jorge De La Rosa, and we know De La Rosa's worse on the road throughout his career than at home, which is about the most baffling stat that I can come up with. But
it really is.
I mean, it's been the case throughout his career. Maybe he likes the home cooking, like literal home cooking in Colorado, but I like that matchup a lot. And then for the same reasons you highlighted Neil Walker, I'm gonna go on the opposite side of the game and say Colton Wong hitting at the top, near the top of the order. We got Carpenter back atop that Cardinals order, but Wong's been typically hitting second. He can turn a fastball around, so if Cole misses that over the middle of the plate, Wong can put a charge into a baseball, and fairly affordable on both sides. $2,800 on FanDuel and $36 on DraftKings. So expect him to be low owned because Garrett Cole is one of the best pitchers in baseball. So I'm not expecting much ownership for Wong, but anytime you can get a guy that can put a charge into the ball like he can, is also capable of stealing bases on occasion, you got to like that, especially at low ownership.
Yeah, I like that. And speaking of a guy who's going to be low owned, and is not affordable, the complete opposite there.
Yes.
Josh Donaldson, $5,600 on FanDuel, $61 on DraftKings. You're going to see a lot of people tonight see that price tag and say, oh, no, I'm not paying that for Josh Donaldson. But there are few players in the world that have as high of upside as Josh Donaldson. And I don't know if you know, but he just so happens to have hit 6 home runs in his past 10 games. The guy is having a phenomenal season. 31 homers, 83 RBIs, 82 runs scored. Power hitter hitting second lineup at the Rogers Center, the AL Coors Field. I'm not saying he's a guy you have to play tonight, especially at that price tag, but if you're going to have multiple tournament entries, which I will, I'm expecting Josh Donaldson to be under 10% owned, and whenever you can get a hitter of his caliber at that kind of ownership, sign me up for that.
Yeah, and rumor has it he likes hitting at the Rogers Center. It seems to be treating him okay in year one with the Blue Jays.
Not too bad.
I mean, as you said, especially if you're going to go with the guy on FanDuel like CC Sabathia, you're going to have excess money.
Yep.
Throw in a Josh Donaldson because if he's under 10% owned and he gives you a double dong performance, you're just running laps around the field at that point, and we know Donaldson's capable of that. So I like the Donaldson call. A couple more affordable options that'll be a little bit easier to budget for on your rosters that also possess power. Miguel Sano against Nick Martinez at home, like him quite a bit. 28 on FanDuel, 4,200 on DraftKings. And Alex Rodriguez, affordable on DraftKings at 4,100. A little less affordable on FanDuel at $4,000. But again, I hate to belabor the point, but when Danny Salazar struggles, it's usually because his fly balls are exiting the ballpark. It's not an issue of him beating himself with walks. And power pitcher against power hitter has a tendency to result in some fireworks on occasion. So I do like Alex Rodriguez. And then one other name, and I'll give a hat tip to Jason from DFC for this call on his GPP picks, which if you haven't read them yet, give them a look. They're really, really strong today. I mean, they're really strong every day, but I really like
particularly strong.
I really like his Danny Valencia call tonight. He's been hitting in the heart of that A's lineup, and you're going to see a lot of people yank him from their lineups because Mark Burley was a scratch in favor of R.A. Dickey today. But Valencia's been hitting right-handed pitching a little bit this year. He's back at the Rogers Center, which is, I mean, a pretty good ballpark for hitting in. He was hitting there earlier when he was a member of the Blue Jays. And as we've said on a few occasions on the podcast. When Dickey's knuckleball is not dancing, it is a meatball, and Valencia can put a charge into a meatball. So I do like him as a really nifty tournament swerve, I think.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of that. And I love myself some Danny V. And the other guy I've got as another under the radar type of play, Chris Johnson, $2,600 on FanDuel, flat minimum first base or third base option on DraftKings at $2,000. The only thing that this guy does, but he does it very well, is hit left-handed pitching. Well, you know the drill with CC Sabathia by now. He struggles against righties. That's the whole reason that the Indians brought him in, is because they needed a right-handed bat that could hit lefties. He plays first base. He plays third base. Plays whatever they need him to play. He's got 7 hits in his last 2 games with 2 doubles. Not a lot of power with him, obviously. Never has been a power hitter, but good contact hitter that if Sabathia, is not himself, or if he is himself, I should say, against right-handed bats here, Chris Johnson could be in line for a really nice day at a really cheap price tag.
Yeah, and likely a really low ownership as well.
Absolutely. And moving on to shortstop, head and shoulders above the rest is Troy Tulowitzki, but you're not setting yourself apart in a GPP by playing Tulo, because you got to imagine with the lack of options, he's going to be huge owned. So the guys I'm looking at, and I know this probably seems pretty weird by now that I touted CC Sabathia, and now I'm talking about a bunch of Indians bats, but I mean, that's what you got to do in GPPs, is play the guy that no one's going to play for these reasons. But Jose Ramirez and Francisco Lindor both look like fine options to me tonight against CC Sabathia. I slightly prefer Ramirez just because he's been really locked in recently. He's hit triple, couple doubles, a homer over his last 5 games. He's batting high up in that order, batting second most of the time. Lindor is a guy who's been showing some power, though, so I don't think you can go wrong with either one. You can play them both on DraftKings, so get a really interesting Indian stack in there. Try to get all those switch hitters and right-handed bats in there in one of your tournament lineups.
Yeah, and I mean, that's you bring up a really good point. We're talking about entering multiple GPP rosters. You're obviously not rostering Lindor and Ramirez with CC Sabathia, but I mean, you're looking for some cheap options with Clayton Kershaw, who we also love. These are the kind of guys that you're going to want to trot out there. And obviously, the whole point of using a CC Sabathia is low ownership, good matchup, plus having money to spend on bats at other positions that you won't be able to roster with Clayton Kershaw. So obviously there's some give and take, and it does make sense to be on both sides of the same coin on occasion. So I like those calls. I also I just don't see a lot at shortstop tonight. I mean, you expect that if people are going to be off of Troy Tulowitzki, they're going to be spinning down to probably a near min salary Alcides Escobar against Daniel Norris. 2,300. He's always a popular cash games play as a leadoff hitter against a bad pitcher. And I wouldn't call Daniel Norris a bad pitcher, but he's a young pitcher who's been inconsistent so far. Hasn't really gotten his bearings about him at the big league level. So I'm thinking Escobar is going to be a popular punt, which brings me to a less popular punt who I like as well, and that's Eric Ibar, $2,200 on FanDuel, and he checks in at $3,100 on DraftKings, hitting I believe 6th last check against left-handed pitching for the Angels. So he's going to be behind these big bats, the Pujols, the Trouts, the Crones. So these high on base percentage guys like Trout and Pujols could be on the pond for Eric Ibar tonight. And there's not a lot of power in his bat, but U.S. Cellular is going to maximize anybody's pop. And John Danks is just so lost against right-handed batters that you kind of got to like Ibar a little bit as a punt that is probably going to be a low-owned punt outside of the Angel stacks, of course. Yeah,
and despite a great matchup, when you can get a guy in a great matchup with low ownership, you got to like that. One more guy I'll throw out there has been absolutely on fire over the past couple weeks, Asdrubal Cabrera. And for new DFS players, maybe people who are new to watching baseball, this is a guy who was a good hitter a few years back. I mean, he was an all-star player for the Indians. This guy has talent. He was awful to begin the year. Everybody kind of wrote him off, but I mean, he's been crushing the ball. He's batting almost 500 over the past, I think it's 12 games. And he's got kind of an inflated price tag, and on a night like tonight, paying up at shortstop for someone not named Troy Tulowitzki really going to be setting you apart, because everyone's going to look at that position and say, oh, that position's awful, like we kind of did.
Yep.
I want to go cheap. You're not going to see a lot of ownership for a guy like Cabrera, and even if he does what he did last night, I mean, goes 2 for 3 with a double and a run scored, that's perfectly acceptable for a guy that's going to be probably less than 5% owned.
at a position where, I mean, just posting a positive score is possibly going to set you apart.
Yeah, that's a fair point on tonight's slate for sure. Outfield options, your top guys, Mike Trout, of course. I won't say it's not close, but he's definitely your top option. He's pricey, but rightfully so. He gets John Danks coming off an 0 for 4 performance. Don't be surprised to see him flip that number and make it a 4 for 4. I mean, John Danks probably wouldn't be around that long if Trout's putting up a couple hits, because when he makes contact, he doesn't get cheated. Doesn't hit a whole lot of singles. So Mike Trout, definitely your top option. Jose Bautista, anytime he's at home, he gets an average or worse pitcher. He's in play, and he's got big-time upside. I mean, he's homered in 4 of his last 6 games. He's got 6 in his last 10. That's all this guy does is walk and hit home runs. So he's going to score runs, and he's probably going to hit the ball a long way. Doesn't take a whole lot in the Rogers Center for a guy like Jose Bautista to send one out.
No, and he's $300 more expensive than Mike Trout on DraftKings. So if you're looking for some ownership suppression, expect for that to be the case on DraftKings, where $5,800 is pretty tough to squeeze onto some rosters depending on what pitchers you're looking at. I like Locane a lot at $4,800 on DraftKings. More affordable and probably going to be owned a little bit more on FanDuel at $3,800, but gets a rookie left-hander. He's really come on as power hitter this year. Not Kane's strongest suit entering the year, but ISO's there to back it up. I mean, he's hitting the ball farther, and 12 home runs on the year, 20 stolen bases, so he's got the speed to back that with as well. Gotta love well-rounded players like that in GPPs. A less well-rounded player with a lot of power, JD Martinez, checks in at $5,100 on DraftKings, and he is $3,700 again, like Lorenzo Cain, a little easier to budget for. Probably going to see a little bit more ownership on FanDuel, but strong play there as well. Josh Reddick, a guy that I like a lot, gets a great park factor shift moving from O.co to Rogers Center tonight. $4,200 on DraftKings, $25 on FanDuel. He's your biggest power threat, I think, in that A's lineup. And again, Dickey, if that knuckleball's not knuckling, it's a meatball. Reddick can hit the ball a long way. And then we're looking at some the Yankees outfield bats I like a bit. Jacoby Ellsbury and Brett Gardner. Neither's a huge power hitter, but Gardner's power's come on since the start of last season. So another guy who could really make a mistake damaging for Danny Salazar, which we know has been an issue with him at times, and a well-rounded hitter, much in the same mold as Lorenzo Cain, that can steal a base, can hit a home run, and sets the table for those other Yankees big boppers. So if Gardner gets on, he's always a threat to score. And then last name that I'm going to give is Gregory Polanco against Michael Wacha. $3,800 on DraftKings, and he checks in at $3,000 on FanDuel. He's been locked in of late, and he does his best work against right-handed pitching. Wacha probably going to be a semi-popular pitcher tonight. You're certainly not going out of your way to attack him with a lot of hitters, but Polanco hitting atop that order, and he's another guy with a power speed combination, more so in the speed department, with 20 stolen bases on the year, but he has his 6 home runs, and the scouting reports kind of peg him as a guy that is supposed to hit for a little bit more power. We've seen that he could put a charge into a mistake. I mean, just ask Clayton Kershaw. He ended that scoreless streak by really attacking that first pitch of the game, and I mean, you don't obviously want to go down to a small sample size of one pitch, but the guy can turn on a mistake, and gotta love the lineup spot, hitting leadoff for the Buccos.
Yeah, and a guy, his teammate, same exact price on FanDuel, way too cheap for a power speed combo. Opposite side, though, more power than speed, but also a ton of stolen bases, is Starling Marte. $3,000 on FanDuel, I think, is just a travesty of a price for a guy who's, I mean, I keep saying it, he's putting up the numbers we expected Andrew McCutchen to put up this year. 22 steals, 13 homers, 21 doubles on the season, 3K, and I mean, he's just a very consistent player. So, I mean, either one of those guys, both of them, if you want to throw them both in a tournament lineup. Another guy, Aaron Hicks, against Nick Martinez. Yep. This is another one of those guys who's been doing it all. He's got 9 stolen bases on the year, 7 doubles, 2 triples, 6 homers. And wasn't an everyday player at the beginning of the year. So you like him quite a bit. I'm looking at Baby Crush, Chris Davis as well. He's a guy who's very hit or miss. He does not make a lot of good contact, or not a lot of contact, but when he makes contact, he can send the ball a long way. So you look at his game logs, and it's very telling. 3 for 5 with 2 home runs and 6 RBIs, 0 for 3, 0 for 3, 2 for 4, 2 homers, 0 for 3. So he's the ultimate boomer bust play. But, man, this kid has a lot of power, though.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback on your Hicks pick and say teammate Eddie Rosario looks pretty good as well. Doesn't hit as high in the lineup as Hicks. Hicks has been hitting leadoff for the club. But if Martinez is messy, which I expect him to be, you're going to want to have some of these Twins hitters. And Rosario, another guy who can really sting the ball, really squares it up pretty well, has a lot of line drives. And one name that I did almost overlook, and that's almost forget to include, didn't overlook, we talked about him in the prep, Andre Ethier, just $2,800 on DraftKings, exact same price on FanDuel, so expect his FanDuel ownership to be a little bit lower. Kershaw owner's probably going to grab Ethier almost immediately to him and some price suppression and some salary relief, but $2,800 is hard to ignore on either site. Zimmerman, not a terrible pitcher by any stretch, actually an above average pitcher, but Andre Ethier hits right in the heart of that Dodgers lineup and is underpriced in a matchup against a righty.
Certainly, and I'm going to go with his teammate, another boomer bust option, Yasiel Puig, way underpriced on both sites. I like him quite a bit as well. And then as you're looking at cheap guys, probably won't have a good lineup spot. I like Kevin Kiermaier. He homered last night. The guy's in a good spot, platoon advantage tonight. And then if you want a cheap guy, fairly cheap guy for Cleveland with some upside, Abraham Almonte, a guy who just got called up recently. He's got 2 homers in his 3 games since getting called up, 2 doubles as well. So, I mean, this is a guy with a ton of power. Not a great hitter, but a very powerful hitter for your tournament lineups. Really cheap. I believe he batted 6th last night. So this is a guy that's going to have a decent lineup spot with a ton of upside.
And one more cheap name that I'll give you. Guy that's been hitting leadoff for his new club, Shane Victorino, $2,700 on DraftKings, $2,200 on FanDuel, and I mean he's batting right-handed against John Danks. What else do you need to know?
Yep, absolutely. And that's going to wrap things up for us. Find us on Twitter at DF Cafe. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Check out Colossus, our optimizer, cheat sheets, a lot of great content at dailyfantasycafe.com.